Anyone who wants, we have hostesses who can come to you. Oh, my apologies. Oh, I'm sorry. These are, these are questions that have been submitted by Twitter. And we have one here. With exponentially increasing unpredictability and change in the world of technology, how do you keep your company resilient? So perhaps since we have two prominent CEOs here, how do you keep your company resilient? I mean, I hear from you, Ben, that you essentially look for opportunities elsewhere if they don't present themselves here in Europe.
Oh, there are lots of opportunities here in Europe. We have one of the largest research facilities in the world here in Europe. My argument is not that you can't do it in Europe. My argument is that unless we change our attitude, it's not enough. Because we have a whole generation of young people that will stare into unemployment for more than 25 or 30%. Totally unacceptable. And the only way you deal with that is to go massively into innovation. Massively. So how does you deal with that as a company? Well, you have to turn off the old, and which is always the existing business, and favor the new. That is the role of the boss. To be unreasonable, to make sure that that's what's already there, which gets the massive support of the existing organization, is a little bit hold back for the new that never gets the support that it needs. That's my view.
So what I hear you say is you have to practice creative destruction from within.
Absolutely.
That it's the CEO's job to actually kill projects within the company that maybe aren't promising or not future-oriented.
And foster new ones.
Okay, well, of course. That's good. Okay, Jean-Paul.
Yeah, for me, I'm not as negative as the other person was. I think, you know, of course, I mean, if you're talking politics or general ideas, I may agree with you. But, you know, regarding just what we do as a company, I believe that the people, the new generation, believes more than ever in innovation. I believe that we can really have motivated people that are really involved and committed. And I'm more optimistic than you are. And I think that some companies are doing what it takes to create innovation, not only in India or China or wherever, but also in Europe, and that Europe can be a real reservoir of talent, of imagination, of creativity, and that also it's our role to foster that. Regarding your question of how to manage in an unpredictable world, I think it's the game today. And the best solution, I think, is to be very global, because obviously in the world today there is something happening every day somewhere else. But the best solution is first to have a long-term vision. I think what's very important is to have a clear direction of where you want to go, so that you're not too much driven by the immediate circumstances. And number two, to be truly global, so that what can happen somewhere can be offset by what happens in many other countries. So I think that the globality of companies and a long-term strategy, a very clear long-term strategy, can help you drive your boat even in the storms of the days today.
So what I hear is internationalization really as a key strategy. By the way, not just for large companies, the same is true for small companies. Because small companies that pursue an internationalization strategy tend to grow twice as fast, etc. But Celeste, you wanted to jump right in.
Yeah, because that actually brings it back very, very importantly, because we've talked about large companies, but let's talk about small companies. Yeah. And if you really want innovation, you have to allow and permit failure. The problem that I often see in the European context is we're very conservative in that a company fails. It's as if it tarnishes those who actually started that company. I don't see that in the United States. What I see in the United States is failure is taken as gaining experience and therefore encouraging you to start again and again and again. And with companies looking at it as a biologist, natural selection will always occur in those companies and in those ideas. And if we don't allow failure, we tie ourselves to a rather conservative approach that every company must be a success, then we actually stifle innovation in those small companies. And that's, I think, would be disastrous. So we have to continue to allow startup after startup after startup, and it's through that large base that you will actually get some pinnacles emerging.
That's a very important point that you raised. One of the board members of the Lisbon Council is a German entrepreneur who now moved to Silicon Valley, and he says in the Valley, it's like a badge of honor that you have failed. But how do you change that?
I think you've got to change attitudes, and it's much more difficult than changing science or anything else. It's actually you have to change the culture, the way venture capital in Europe actually operates, and also particularly in encouraging early angel investment. At the same time, don't keep on and on and on supporting enterprises. Allow closure, allow people to fail, but allow them then to be resurrected in a different area. Sometimes when we have major and large-scale projects, we'll find people who are doing a particular area of science will keep on chasing the grants. Actually, it's better to close the whole thing down and start from scratch again. So we're kind of built into a very conservative approach of maintaining a particular enterprise. Frankly, I'd have a built-in closure date on every single project that's actually started, and allow new ideas to keep coming forward and recycle the resource much more frequently.
But essential for that is that you also have the flexibility in your labor laws to do a refresh, to give people an opportunity to go from one experience to the other, but also for organizations to get new talent on board where other talents may move on further. So I think it's an absolute very important point. But if I have to choose for innovation between maybe 20 billion on flexibility in labor laws, I know what the vast majority of business leaders would say, small and big.
Excellent. So I actually have a proposal for the European Commission. Maybe next year, instead of giving a prize to female innovators, maybe we have a prize for people who failed in their businesses. Kira, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that the stigma of failure is also there in India.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's a big problem we have. And I think it's very important that we encourage experimentation with new models. For instance, I was very taken with David Cameron's new approach of leveraging the database that NHS has to pursue a drug innovation. And I think that's a very good idea. But, you know, there's a lot of debate about patient confidentiality. And I think the danger is we should not get into the perceived paranoia of patient confidentiality and shut this idea down, because I think there's more to be derived in terms of the innovative benefits to both researchers and, more importantly, to patients. So I think we must not be scared to innovate and experiment, because that's one of the big cultural defects we have both in India and in this part of the world. And you very rightly said that access to capital markets is what makes US what it is for small innovators.
Kira, that was fantastic, but the NHS innovation, you know, that debate's been going on for 12 years in Britain. So it's great that the Prime Minister's announcing that today. It's 12 wasted years as far as I'm concerned.
Can you put it into context? Maybe people aren't familiar with this.
So the idea is that the NHS actually holds more clinical information on every single individual patient, and the idea is that anonymized, so it can't be identified back to the individual, data is actually made available to both the public and private sector to allow further exploitation, both in terms of clinical research, but also epidemiological research and drug discovery.
Very interesting. Sylvia, you want to?
Well, I agree that mistakes sometimes are big opportunity. And that's sometimes what is new looks like different and ugly at the first sight. Sometimes it happened that I was very convinced about a product and the result was a total disaster. And after years, people understood that it was the right product, but it was not at the right moment. So this has to I think from mistakes we really can, if we are free to experiment, we can really innovate. We don't have to be afraid of the results. We don't have to look too much at what the others are doing, I think. That's what I always try to do, to surprise myself and to surprise the others. I'm very proud of being always the first to get to a point. But I know and I see that the things in which I believe most sometimes are totally too strong or too strange, and so I very often feel that I was stupid, it was too early maybe, and I would have to, I sometimes think that I have to be more simple, more immediate, but at the very first moment of the new creation, I start again and again to just accomplish my needs. And I think this is something that makes us look ahead when you have an environment that makes you feel free to express your visions.
You have a wonderful way of describing just the difficulty of being an innovator, because what you say so eloquently is how difficult it is to be ahead of the curve, because by definition, if it was mainstream, it wouldn't be innovative. No. So this means that the person who is innovative needs to really sort of, pull on the frontiers and to fight, yeah. and this process of suffering that you described so well. Yeah. So, and it strikes me that even though this is never really articulated, this is a big issue in Europe, where there still tends to be a lot of conformity and fear of sort of falling out of the conventional. And so you do a great job of verbalizing something that I think a lot of innovators are feeling. Now we take one more question from Twitter, and then I'll come to you on the floor. This is a question from CGRA at _twit. This is actually a question about L'Oréal, but I'm going to change the question. This is, how does L'Oréal measure innovation? And I just want to hear from you, not how L'Oréal measures innovation. Jean-Paul, you're welcome to explain that. But how do we measure innovation? Because traditionally, here at the European level at least, we have always used the 3% R&D target. And there was this really strong belief that if only Europe spent 3% of its GDP on R&D, all would be well and we would be innovative. Is that enough, Ben?
So we spend 15% in our business, and I'm not so sure that that number is any indication on the competitive nature of where you are in your industry, because industries are very different. And if I look to L'Oréal, that's a world leader, and you said you do 3 or 4%, and you're a world leader. So it's very different industry per industry. It is also very different to make sure that innovation is not innovation for the sake of innovation. One of the things that I try to say in the beginning is, we have a need of innovation because we are at the risk of losing a whole generation. So we need employment. We need employment, meaningful employment. That means employment that has something to give to society as large, that is built on the values that we want to have in Europe, that gives a sustainable approach to business and to life in general. So it is much more than just measuring the number of scientists that you have or the money that you spend on basic science. We happen to be one of the few companies in the world that spent substantial money on basic science. And I can tell you, I get a lot of flack for that from my shareholders, because they say, leave that to universities, you just do a quick adaptation. I sincerely believe that we can create more jobs, more capabilities, more opportunities by doing this. And the proof is on my side, not on their side. So that means that you need to work in the reality that if you want to measure innovation, it's the effect that you measure, not the absolute innovation effort.
So what you're calling for are output measures rather than input measures.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's a concrete example. Celeste.
Okay, I think the first thing you have to realize is the way in which the globally top 20 or 30 universities are configured. Most people think that most of the expenditure of a university is on undergraduate education. If you take a university such as Cambridge, annual turnover is around about 1.6 billion euros per annum. About 8 to 10% of that turnover is actually accounted for by undergraduate education. Over 60% is based on research. And that isn't unusual for us. Harvard would have the same numbers, Yale would have the same numbers. So you've got to understand that research is the core part of much of the activity. So we can measure the basic science fairly straightforward by what we're actually getting in terms of grant awards and publications. More difficult is how do you measure applied research? How do you measure the impact of what you're doing for society? Because it's part of our mission to do work that is relevant to society. How do you measure a sociologist's contribution to understanding a particular problem that occurs within a group, or the adaptation or implementation to a social problem? So at the moment, there are a variety of mechanisms that are used. They're all qualitative and subjective, and you generally believe that you're making an area. At the level of entrepreneurship and creation of companies, it becomes much easier to measure, and I've given you one measure that we would be applying in Cambridge.
Very good, excellent. Sylvia, how do you measure your success? In the number of baguette bags that you sell, or how do you measure your innovative prowess?
Well, of course, yes. These are numbers are important, but I just want to tell you something. As a creative, we understood 10 years ago that we had to innovate our company. Fendi before was belonging to my family. And we understood that innovation was important. So 10 years ago, we decided to sell the company to a group. And the company was doing very well. So we didn't sell because we were in need of selling, but really because we were understanding that innovation was arriving. So there was a kind of big, strong competition to get this company. And the most innovative group won. And the group is LVMH, Moët Hennessy Louis Vuitton, which is a group that innovates a lot and with fantastic results. And today, of course, in the last 10 years, we innovate at any level in our company. Imagine that 10 years ago, they bought the company and we only owned 4 direct stores. Today we have more than 120. So numbers are important to understand that you are innovating. And we get we don't lose time, we get any opportunity. Today we have a strong innovation with new markets and also with different tools of distribution channels. Internet for fashion is important. We innovate and I think it's important innovate, but also something that we pay a lot of attention to our products. The quality of the product is what we pay the most attention. We innovate with new techniques. We experiment a lot. We are very experimental, even if we keep we are very faithful with some rules and old values. So I think that contrast between our history and the new technologies that we apply is what make us an innovative company in fashion.
Well, what I hear you say is that as a family company, you essentially understood that you needed
to change.
Yeah. And were then acquired by LVMH,
yes.
Which brought a lot of new expertise
yes.
into the company, a lot of new ways of innovating.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because Europe, of course, has many family-owned businesses, and many of them are perhaps struggling with the kind of strategy.
You have to be very generous with your company to decide to sell, because, of course, it's like having a child.
Yeah.
But that's what my family decided, and and I'm very happy today. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
So Jean-Paul, the question actually originally came to you. So I want to say to @CGRA_twit, this is the answer to your question.
So, as you said before, I mean, you definitely measure innovation with the output and certainly not with the input. You know, the fact that you invest 3.5 or 4% of your sales in R&D, it doesn't mean that you are a great innovator or not. And the real name of the game is to be able to, with a certain budget, to innovate more. It's a real return on investment or a real productivity of your research. So for us, the real sign is very simply the number of great new products based on new technologies that we are able to launch every year. You can also, of course, measure in terms of patents or in terms of new molecules that we are inventing or creating every year. But what I can tell you is that definitely for the 3,500 people who work in the R&D, they are really incentivized and mobilized on what they find and not only on what they are studying or researching. And it's a real innovation-driven R&D, because at the end of the day, that's what counts. I just want to come back also to what you said before, and is that what's very important also is to create innovations that can be marketed. It's true that sometimes, people can be very satisfied to invent great new things, but that have no potential, no business potential. And in a company like ours, what's very important is to be able to create innovations that can be marketed all over the world and that will transform into great product success.
Very interesting. Thank you. Kiran, how do you measure success and innovation?
Well, I think there are very standard metrics, number of patents, what is your pipeline, whether it's extending, how many scientists are you adding every year. And of course, for us, licensing income is a big metrics and measure of how we are innovating. But I think one of the important metrics that we all have to really address is the investment climate. Do we get more investors in backing innovation? I think that would be the true measure of innovation. Whether it's the stock market in a company which backs innovative companies like they do in the US, or whether it's getting more investors backing your kind of company which is very innovative, and where there are many other companies that have very predictable, less risky models which get all the investment, and the riskier companies don't get that much investment. I think that's the kind of metrics you have to really track. Because the more investors that back innovation will make a country more innovative.
That's a very interesting point, because I take all of your answers at face value, but it strikes me that it's much easier for a company to measure success and innovation than, for instance, for the European Commission or for a government. And this is where I think this orientation towards input measures comes into. I'm going to go to the floor, but before I want to warn my panelists that one of the debates I still want to have here today is something that I mentioned up front, namely that Europe is really in a deep, deep crisis, in many ways an existential crisis. How can we use this crisis to kickstart innovation and to get serious about all of the things that you mentioned throughout this debate? Before we come to that, perhaps now is a good opportunity to go to the floor. Do I see anyone? Yes, I see a gentleman there in the back. Please introduce yourself and be very brief and concise. And if you have a question to someone specific, please say that.
Okay. Thank you. Professor Dinson from the IMNRC Newport Network. Just 3 short comments. Innovation one must also think of renovating education. Also, a comment to Professor Borysiewicz. As far as I'm concerned, the academically gifted may be clever, but what the world needs is intelligence. And lastly, I'm regularly invited to lectures and conferences at the European Parliament, universities and Commission and so forth. And I made an alarming conclusion quite some time ago. and that is that whatever the thematic, the issues have reached such a level of complexity that the guests, experts, academics, politicians and audience are getting completely out of their depth. Why? Because they are faced with an integrated interdisciplinary challenge, something that their education has not prepared them for. There is a need to change from unidisciplinarity to the education of tomorrow, integrated interdisciplinarity. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go to our panelists, perhaps we can take a few comments and questions. I saw a lady over here. There you go. Please stand up.
Thank you. Sorry. The process of innovation...
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Maria Cerna and I'm a student, a master's student at HB University. The process of innovation, as far as I see it, is a process of creation and also of making something new, but something of value, and especially of responding to an existing problem of humanity, yes. But nowadays, my personal feeling is that this process of innovation has disregarded a very important aspect, and that it's the aspect of added value that it brings. In other words, instead of responding to problems, we are trying to invent new problems without actually bringing a real added value to human life. What is your opinion about this?
Can you give an example to new problems that we invent?
Many, from the smallest to the biggest. For example, I heard about this company, Scanadu, that is trying to invent a personal scan like an iPod, where you put something on your neck to 24-hour monitorize your health and to make us basically maniacs about health issues that we don't really have. So this is just one example.
I just needed to visualize your point, but thank you. You made it very eloquently. I see a lady over there, please.
Thank you. My name is Cristina Cannone. I work for IBM, but I'm also a student. I want to go back to what was said, that talent is what we need most. And I wonder whether you agree with me that as we study history or math or biology, probably our children should be taught innovation as well. So looking at the European innovators and studying their history and their success. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a lady over there.
I'm Ismahan El-Wafi from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency.
Can you speak up? We could barely hear you.
Okay, Ismahan El-Wafi from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency from Canada.
Wow.
My question, I would like to hear from the prominent panel their insight on open innovation. Kiran touched on it at the beginning. So I was just thinking if you see it as an opportunity to boost further innovation, and especially if we're talking about publicly funded research, like in universities or government institutions.
Do you practice open innovation in the Food Inspection Agency in Canada? I'd just be curious.
We'll be interested in technologies if they're out there and they are cheaper. If they are owned by big companies, it's always there.
Yeah, because I think Canada is actually a little bit ahead of the curve here, so that's why I was wondering. I see a hand somewhere over there, but please go ahead, introduce yourself.
I'm Rana Putterfin from the Canadian Embassy in The Hague. My question is, Vice Chancellor of Cambridge mentioned that a need to change culture and the way venture capital operates. And I know that in Canada, we have limited venture capital funds, but we're very keen on co-investments with other VC funds. But I noticed that in Europe, there's a number of national governments. For example, in the Netherlands, they contribute to techno startup companies, but by legislation, they're limited to investing only in Dutch or European companies. But in terms of changing attitudes or future models, what is the interest by some of the panel members or their views about looking to partner with VC funds outside of Europe, Canada, for example?
Thank you, and I actually propose next time around to have a Canadian panelist, maybe, because Canadians are so active in this debate. Do we have anyone here who represents a venture capital fund? It's always good to have an innovation convention without anyone who actually has the cash to... Do we have any entrepreneurs in the room? We actually have a few. Well, you, Don, of course. But I see a gentleman over there. Is this relevant to you, this debate? Do you find yourself in some of the topics that you hear? And can you please introduce yourself? It's the gentleman over here in the brown jacket.
Thank you. Yes, of course. Oh, sorry, my name is David Berg. I'm president of Crowdfunding Europe. And
Crowdfunding
Europe. So I've set up a few crowdfunding initiatives in Holland. And crowdfunding is an answer to stimulating capital, stimulating talent, and stimulating collaboration on a high level. And it's all about entrepreneurs, investing in entrepreneurs. And also helping them out in bad times. But also flourishing in good times. So yes, this is helpful. I'm here to see if I can get some contacts in the European Commission to accelerate crowdfunding in Europe.
And can you explain to us, where do your funds come from?
From entrepreneurs.
So entrepreneurs give you money to invest in other innovative ventures?
Well, what they do is they... I have a website, which is up and coming. It's called the 1200. So if anybody here has an idea that he wants to make a reality, for instance...
This is the man to see.
Yeah, well, I only need 200 characters. That's the maximum. Just... kind of, envision your passion, and then we will find in our crowds about 5,000 or 10,000 people that are willing to invest in it.
That's excellent. I can confirm what you're saying. I recently published a paper on micro-multinationals where we actually speak about crowdfunding as an opportunity for aspiring entrepreneurs.
It's a beautiful thing for the future.
So anyone who's thinking about starting a business or has a bright idea, go and see this man.
Yep.
Any other... Don, I will introduce Don because he is really too important to introduce himself. Don Tapscott, ladies and gentlemen, is of course the best-selling author of Wikinomics, How Mass Collaboration Changes Everything. And he was recently named by Harvard Business Magazine or Harvard Business Review as one of the 10 leading business thought leaders in the world. So congratulations on that, Don. Your comment, your question.
I'm part of the Canadian plot to take over this conference. I'd like to come back to what Ben said. I mean, he kind of dropped this big, something on the conversation here. And rather than saying, if we had $80 billion, how would we spend it? Maybe if all the panelists could speak to what are the main impediments? I mean, Ben alluded to what we're trying to achieve here, which is prosperity, growth, economic, social development, to get us out of this big crisis in Europe. Ben alluded to having an educated workforce and investing in human capital. Someone's talked about the problems of getting venture capital. Somebody else talked about culture. But could we just hear from the panel or anybody else about why are we here? What is the problem that we're trying to address?
I think that's a very good question, Don, and thank you for that. Because Europe so clearly has so much potential, but somehow we can't live up to it. And it is that we're trying to identify. I don't see... Oh, we have another intervention here. Please introduce yourself.
Aaron Ginato from Association Perspective on Innovation, Science and Creativity. First of all, a question. Can we discuss about innovation if we have no community patent? Because we are trying to have it for more than 15, 20 years, I don't know exactly. Can we have? This is a question, a big one. And another, because let me tell you, I am also in a group of inventors. It's very difficult for us if we have enough the finance. If we have in every national of his patent there, but in any European Union country is too small to compete with Canada or United States.
Thank you. I think that the issue of a community patent is very well understood, and your question is very well taken. I'm sure that our panelists will refer to it later on. You have a second question.
Okay, very brief. It's very simply, what should we do innovation? Because we have to talk here about purposeful innovation. We have to build, for instance, what kind of society of civilization. We are not, we are seeing in this crisis that there are a lot of problems. If we do not build, let's say, sustainable, knowledge-based economy, what is for innovation? The purpose of innovation is very important.
Thank you so much for your intervention. I think I saw another hand back there. Okay, here's another gentleman, but I want to complain about the women in the room, because there are lots of them here, but we only had 2 questions in the beginning from ladies, so get ready. I'm going to start calling on you if you don't, I see no hands. Is that a lady up there? Just bear with me one moment. You're not a lady. Go ahead.
My name is Johan van Hemelrijk, and I'm Secretary General of the Belgian Biotech Industry Association. And innovation is the return to society of innovation is the product to the market, in the market, that can enthusiasm entrepreneurs and also those that have done the research. However, in the European society, we have a kind of risk-averse not only a risk-averse attitude, not only in research, but also in acceptance of the products that are coming from that research. And I think the acceptance of the products is essential. Now, innovation by definition is disturbing, and this disturbance of society in the beginning often leads to legislation that does not allow the innovation to give its return back to society. And this has happened in many areas, one of which is novel food. And I think we have to change that attitude, and that attitude has to change also in the legislation. It is not by chance that the Americans speak about benefit-risk, and we speak about risk-benefit.
Very interesting. Who here in the room is thinking about starting a business? Oh, boy. That's depressing. Okay. Did you find a lady? Okay, there you go.
Thank you very much. It's more a comment. I work at the EU Committee of the Regions, and I was pleased to hear that the importance of collaboration between universities and regions, and I would add the whole innovation ecosystem, as we called it. I'm pleased to hear that this was mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, since I discriminated against the man here, yes, I see you. Okay, the microphone is coming. It's a gentleman all the way up there. And we have another intervention right here. Go ahead. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name's Keith Simons. A question for the panel directly. Given that €80 billion programme was announced last week by the Commissioner, Horizon 2020, I was just wondering what the view of the panel is about the contents of that. Thank you.
Very good. I'm sure that there are many people in this room who would like to hear the answer to that. Okay, the gentleman over there.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Philip van Kanegem. I'm the founder and managing partner of Thinking Arch. Sorry, I'm not a lady. I was waving since the beginning.
It's okay.
Sorry that I'm since pretending not to be a lady, also not a gentleman, apparently. My question, when you go to this kind of events on innovation in the US, people tend to speak the word creativity very, very often. I'm surprised that actually today I heard it a couple of times, and mainly related to the creative economy being another part, creative companies like Fendi, sure. My question is, what do you think when, for example, Ben Verwaayen, when you talk about an attitude change that is needed, where do you consider the importance of creativity in this attitude change? Is this part of it? And the second part of the question, if this would be the case that the creativity attitude might be needed, what do you consider an essential move from big companies, Europe in itself, but mainly big companies, to stimulate this? Is there a role, just like we have a CFO in a company, should we have a creative officer? Which types of examples, procedures could help to stimulate creativity? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a very good question. I see a lady over here, please.
Yes. My name is Chris Hassenstab, and my question goes to Vice Chancellor from Cambridge. I have an ongoing dispute with my dean who wants to use a publication barometer as a measure of creativity and innovation at our university. And I bring up Sir Alexander Fleming and his discovery of penicillin and say, well, if that was the only patent he ever issued, perhaps we're not measuring creativity and innovation correctly. Perhaps you'd like to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a lady over here. Yeah, just bear with me. The microphone will come your way. Oh, that's a pity. There was another lady over there. Okay. And now the ladies speak up. So go ahead, the lady over here in white, please.
Yes, hello. First of all, I would like to compliment you on the way you innovate the moderation work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And my name is Tatiana Sazonova. I'm a Russian, Dutch, and European patent attorney. I'm a nuclear physicist, radiotherapist, and a lawyer by training. And I would like to pose my question to the panel. At the moment, I'm advising a client of mine that is Dutch Medical Delta establishment, which joins a number of academic hospitals and universities which carry out breakthrough in medical technology. But the Dutch government has announced a shortage of funds to support R&D. So the question of public-private cooperation has emerged. And what I have seen from my perspective of being a lawyer is that there is often a conflict of interest between the public establishment, which gains and targets benefit of the public and availability of the technology to the broader masses, and the venture capitalist or the private component whose core business is gaining assets and gaining profits. So could you please comment on your opinion whether the public-private cooperation has future in these times of crisis, of course?
Exactly, and of very constrained budgets. So PPP, a very good point. We have another lady, I think, over here. So my apologies to the hostess. You're actually getting a pretty good workout here. There's another one here. No, right there. The lady right there. That's the issue with ladies. They don't stand up, so they're too shy. Go ahead, introduce yourself.
Not me, apparently. My name's Catherine Gator. I'm Deputy Director for the European Grid Infrastructure. And my question to the panel relates to IT, because I don't think we've heard a great deal about that so far. We federate computing resources across Europe. We combine academic resources, such as they have at CERN, such as they have at Cambridge and other universities. Our problem is we would like to work with industry more, but we are restricted by the fact that you cannot run for-profit services on top of the GÉANT network, which is the infrastructure that we build on top of. So we've been told by our reviewers that we should think about how we can open up what we're doing to businesses, but we have this fundamental restriction. So my question is, should we be putting pressure on to change that? And also, what should we be doing within Europe to provide cloud computing services for businesses? Because that seems to be a key innovation for startups in order to get their businesses to market quicker.
Thank you for raising cloud computing. You should stay for the session with Eric Schmidt, obviously. Okay, we have, I think, one question here. Before you go, I mean, obviously to my panelists, there is no way that you can respond to all of this. So please, I will give you 2 to 3 minutes in the end, and you can just reflect on everything that you heard here. But what I really want you to do is also answer my question, namely, what is the one thing that Europe needs to do now in this crisis to kickstart innovation? So you can comment on anything that you hear here, but the last thought to leave with us is, please, what is the #1 recommendation you have to people here on what Europe needs to do? So, to you.
Claudia Gärtner, Microfluidic Chip Shop. So I have a comment to the lady or a question. from Russia, referring to public-private partnership, because this comes famous, it's popping up in the current framework. And what should be the use, the benefit of this public-private partnership? I used to run one. You have different legal issues, different financial attitudes, and afterwards you need to have somebody being responsible for a commercial benefit for the overall development or whatever. And an institute cannot cover this. What should be therefore the benefit of these PPPs?
I think it goes back to what Celestchik said before about also the interdisciplinary. How can you work together, public, private, in different fields, etc.? Oh, I see we have one more. Okay, this has to be the last one. Go ahead.
Okay, Grégoire Beignet, coming from the Austrian Institute of Technology. Just because you say we have to face a crisis, I would like to ask if in your companies you are aware that the crisis is not only economical or financial, but also challenging the way we live together and we believe in values or not. Maybe it would be interesting to have rooms of innovations about values, new humanism, and these kind of things. So that's my question.
Thank you. And one thing to keep in mind is that I think all of the organizations on the panel are very successful organizations. I'm not even sure you've really been hit by the crisis so much. I know that in your sector, Sylvia, I think you've had double-digit growth, right? And Jean-Paul, you said that you actually increased R&D during the crisis. So you see some people here who actually are doing very well thanks to your innovative power and thanks to all of what that you do to stay competitive. Now, I understand you really have a very tricky task to respond to all of this, but who wants to start? Jean-Paul.
If the question is, what should Europe do in order to foster innovation, my answer would be, of course, inspired from what we know at L'Oréal, is I would say just, take the opportunity of the great shift of the world economy. In our case, there is definitely a crisis in Europe, but at the same time, there is a huge opportunity that, as we have never seen before, in 75% of the planet. I mean, Asia is booming, Latin America is booming, the Middle East is booming, Africa is growing at last. So, in fact, sometimes in Europe, in Brussels, we just forget that the world is doing very well. India is booming too, of course, and the world is doing very well, and it's not because we have here a kind of transition crisis that we should, if we are too, focused on ourselves, we are going to lose the opportunity of the history. So for us, definitely, what I think is important is to have our economy, our businesses plugged to the zones of the world that are knowing a fantastic growth, and make sure that the innovation process are also driven to supply products and innovations for where there is growth. And I think that this could be a fantastic opportunity. I think that Europe is full of talents. We talked about talents before. I think that the Europe is full of people, of researchers, of people with high education, with high talents, with great creativity, and just we need to plug them, to drive them to sources of growth where they are today, and they are very many. So for us and for many companies, I'm not pessimistic at all. I think that we just have to drive the business where the growth is.
Thank you. So opportunity through internationalization. How much of the growth in your company comes from outside of Europe?
100%.
Okay, that's an answer.
Yeah, maybe 95, but today, 70% of the business is made outside of Europe, and 95% of the growth is made outside of Europe. But most of the R&D is still made in Europe. And that's an opportunity for Europe, to move to a new kind of economy with more added value. Maybe, in France, for example, we have today more researchers than people in the factories. So it's a symbol. It's a symbol of a transition, a world in transition. For us, our business in France, for example, which was in the past very industrial, has become completely high added value, research, technology, engineering, etc. So maybe it's a direction also for Europe to become a much more added value continent that can also develop
to move up
business.
the value chain. And L'Oréal sounds very French. Is that an asset in the world?
Yeah, but L'Oréal is not only L'Oréal, it's also Ralph Lauren, Giorgio Armani, and many other brands. So it's the company is French, but 2/3 of our brands are not French. So, but as more importantly, the mission of the company is French, but the mission of the company is to bring beauty around the world, and innovation will always be the critical part of this of the success.
Thank you.
And coming from Europe, I think that in Europe we have the talents to develop and to create and develop this added value.
Thank you. I think that's very interesting, and it's the natural segue to you, Kiran, because he mentioned the opportunities in internationalization and markets abroad, and of course India is a very, very fast-growing market.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on what Jean-Paul said. I think one thing that I do observe about Europe is it's very insular, very inward-looking. In my own dealings with partnering in research, I find that the US is far more vibrant, far more ready to partner and externalize its research efforts with countries and companies in other parts of the world. I found it very difficult to do it in Europe. So
Why?
I think, well, it's an attitude cultural problem. I think European companies must look outwards. Just like Jean-Paul said, there are so many opportunities in other parts of the world. You have to start thinking global in that sense. You have to innovate for global markets. You have to look at developing innovations which have local impact as well. It's not just about Europe. You have to find fashion and products that actually serve other markets in the world. That's how innovation has to go global. And I, for one, really believe that when you look at partnered models, you can derive a lot of benefit, because it's about risk sharing, it's about resource sharing, it's about, this multidisciplinary kind of approach to problem solving. If I just look at healthcare, if you look at the developed world is really grappling with crippling healthcare costs. So the healthcare models are just not working anymore. If you look at the developing world, it just has no healthcare system, and it is trying to develop and build healthcare models. So partnering on these kind of, challenges that the world faces to build affordable and sustainable healthcare models, this is really about learning from what has worked and what hasn't worked. There's a lot of experimentation going on. I just mentioned the mobile phone applications in Africa. There is micro health insurance models that are working in other parts of the world. We haven't really used information technology well enough, cloud computing, database management, and what have you. But, we have to learn to work together, and that's where the PPP model, I think, will work. It won't work everywhere, because after all, you want patents. The private sector is dependent on patents. So sharing of patents is going to be a very different business when it comes to the private sector. But PPP models, I think, will have huge opportunities to share knowledge and to create joint patents in these kind of challenges.
Thank you. I think that's a very, very interesting observation, encouraging the Europeans to be more outward-looking, more collaborative. And you mentioned that these companies don't come to India, and I actually have depressing news, which is that European companies, many of them, particularly SMEs, don't even do business cross-border within the EU. let alone, outside of the EU. So this is something, it's too bad Vice President Tajani is not here, because DG Industry and Entrepreneurship is actually launching an initiative now to help European companies to internationalize. I think it's very important. On the issue of healthcare, I tell you frankly, I think for many Europeans, it's what Ben said before about sort of the arrogance of the Europeans of going to a country like India to learn about healthcare innovation. And it is our own, it's to our detriment, because I know that American companies are going to India to study how you do heart surgeries, because you can do it much cheaper and with a fabulous success rate. But this is a little bit, again, our, I think, inherent arrogance here in Europe of thinking that we do things better. But let me ask you, what is the perception sort of in India about European products? You mentioned Europeans are not really perhaps outward looking, but once we do come to India, do we have a good perception?
Absolutely. I think, European products command a very, very good recognition in India. I think quality is certainly looked upon as being of, the best standards possible. I think innovation is certainly something that we look upon to Europe as being very good at it. But I think what we find difficult to grapple with is the ability to partner in these kind of innovative spaces, which is far easier to do in the US. And that's why you see a lot more US partnerships with companies in Asia than you find between European and Asian companies.
And that's, of course, to the detriment of the Europeans.
Yeah, so I think it's just a case of looking outward, making sure that you break free of your very insular, cautious approach, and you have to be bold and daring and experiment with what's out there,
Yeah, so Jean-Paul also mentioned that too much introspection, you could call it inward looking. You're both very diplomatic. Some people call it navel gazing. But we're certainly very occupied with ourselves here. I understand.
And the danger is that when you're at a time of crisis, you should actually be like what you just said. You should be bolder. But what tends to happen is you regulate more. You put up barriers. You want to, be more insular. And that's the danger that you have to avoid.
Very, very good point. Sylvia.
Well, I'm not really an economist. I didn't take notes as
good
they
for
did.
You.
But I think, yes, I think sometimes we are afraid. And especially in this moment, probably, we have to be open to diversity, to changes, to experimentation, and to young people. I really believe in young people. In my studio, the average age is 23, and I'm surrounded by youngs, and I keep looking at them and learning by them. So I stay young, and they learn from me, and we are a good team, and I'm not afraid of losing my power by having an assistant that can become more talented than me, because I think that the value that they add is much more than this fear that I can have.
I think it's a wonderful point that you make about taking young people seriously. I was in Silicon Valley in July, and it was stunning to me how seriously people took like 19-year-old programmers. And here in Europe, because the situation on the job market is so horrendous for young people, I think we have lost our respect for young people. And it was Ben, you who said that you fear a lost generation. I fear that too. Because where's the innovation going to come from, if not from the young people? There is a reason why you hire these young people. Tell us about that. What is it that they can do that others can't?
They are open to changes. And of course, they love what a house like Fendi represents. It's their dream to come and work for us. They come for free sometimes, if they could. It's like begging. I have curriculum on my table every day when I arrived, and there are very good schools, there are very good academies, universities, but there's nothing better than the real work, the real access on work, on factories, with products, really. So I think we have to really offer them the possibility to come and see and experiment with us, because what they can give is much more than what they can have. I am quite a good teacher. Many of the most renowned designers have been also doing stages at Fendi. Fendi is known for being very open-minded and a very stimulating place where new challenges for us are. Our motto is nothing is impossible, and I think this should be our motto to all of us in Europe. Yeah.
I love that motto, nothing is impossible. The point that you actually touch on is a very important one, because what you're talking about is meritocracy. You say, when I hire a young person and eventually they are more brilliant than I am, so be it. Whereas I think one of the issues is we sometimes thrive on titles and hierarchies and where you are in these hierarchies. So what you are touching on, meritocracy, allowing a young person to rise based on their capability and not on their age, is something that is revolutionary, particularly in the public sector in many European countries. So thank you for raising this issue, which is very important. So let's check.
So some challenging points that were actually made, and I'm going to try and give you a perspective from an organisation that's been around 800 years. It's a long time. If you don't evolve during that time, you die. If you ask, IBM gave a speech the other day and asked the question, of the global 100 companies 100 years ago, how many are still there today? And the answer is 2. All of the others have merged or been demerged or have gone the other way. In other words, there has to be an evolution in order to allow things to survive. So the gentleman who raised the issue of intelligence versus cleverness, I'm sorry, that's such a cliche. I mean, the bottom line, the market decides who's clever and who's intelligent in both those areas, and it decides quite unanimously that the top universities in Europe actually are able to provide employees for some of the major go-getting operations worldwide. So I just don't accept that. And educational reform is inherent in every major university in the world, embracing all that IT and everything else can deliver. So that is just a change that happens anyway. Public-private partnership I ought to touch on, because in my world there is no such thing as anything other than public-private partnership. You start off with research in medicine with the belief that everything that you do is going to be a benefit to mankind. You wouldn't do it otherwise. So you might not want telecommunications because it might make you neurotic. Well, actually, it might save real lives in India and in Africa, and it's working extremely well for pediatric cardiac surgery, as I saw firsthand in India. But at the end of the day, while many people would just like to see an academic or public direction, well, it's rubbish, because at the end of the day, there is no public mechanism to bring a drug to market or to a patient. And therefore, public-private partnership has to happen in virtually every domain. And even those companies that want to build aeroplanes, at the end of the day, ultimately require that interface of the public and private. So we have to make the public-private partnership work on a European level and on a global level. And collaboration is the key. So grid networking, absolute no-brainer for me. It should be open for profit as well as open to the public domain, as should cloud computing. And if you don't watch the grid computer in Europe, just watch what will happen to the Lambda rail in the United States. The other end is really very much about the VC market. And if I can just retort a little to our Canadian friends, the answer is yes, I work very closely with venture capitalists, but none from Canada. And the reason is that what I need is long-term investment, and long-term investment comes from the Far East, particularly Japan and China, not from the United States or Canada as the first port of call. It's about the duration that you need, particularly in life sciences, to get to an end product. And the real problem here is the patience and the risk aversion that we're seeing in the venture capital sector. So much so that at times I've tended to refer to them as investors now, not as venture investors at all. They want too much certainty for the returns that they get. Is there a problem working with them in the public sector? No, there isn't at all. We can embark on it. So for the final point is really what do we do for Europe? Well, the first thing I'd say is stop beating ourselves up. Everything I've heard is very negative about Europe. Europe has got huge institutions, has got excellence written through it. It has problems. So does actually every sector. Don't think China doesn't have problems today with the expanding nature. So Europe has got an awful lot of quality going for it. We have well-established brands. We also have a lot of innovation, particularly in our young people, and we need to trust them. So from my point of view, the solution that I would have is we need to invest, yes, but don't invest in the old or in the dying industries, invest in the new ones. And even in difficult financial crises, when the natural instinct is to be very defensive over what you've got, allow what's going downhill to go downhill and to fail, and build and put that investment into young people that are starting the new enterprises that should make Europe great yet again. So I'm actually an optimist for Europe, not a pessimist. And working with India and working with other parts of the world, you know, every organization in Europe is doing it. Don't think a university such as Cambridge, which has been around for 800 years, or Harvard or Stanford, is actually isolated by our boundaries. We're doing as much probably in India or in California and engaging with companies as well as academic institutions around the world. Start thinking of the top 20 universities in Europe as global institutions, as multinationals in the educational sector and in the research sector, because that's how we're behaving already. And I think that's where the growth for Europe's got to come in the future.
Thank you so much. I think that this call for optimism is very timely and is very well received, because you're right, we tend to pursue sort of self-flagellation here in Europe and not really look at what we are doing well. You mentioned not investing too much in dying industry and investing in the new. And that's, of course, spot on. Is that what you perceive? I mean, are we doing the right thing?
No, because I think any body is going to get very defensive about institutions that we actually have. And it takes a lot of courage and a lot of trust to allow the old to go to the wall and to invest in the new. By the way, just a thing about self-flagellation, you know, that was tried with the Black Death and it failed then. So let's not keep going with it now.
Thank you. I hear you. Ben.
Well, let me ask on behalf of let's say the 30% youth unemployed, where being optimistic will change behavior. If that's required, I'll be very optimistic. But I'm more output-oriented. We are, the question was, what's the one thing Europe should do? And to me, the one thing Europe should do is to choose one priority. We don't choose. We don't even choose whether we are Europe or not. Because that is, in 27 states, as you know, yours included, a very debatable item. So, if you want Europe to act, let's then choose one priority. And let the priority be that we are going to create jobs. And let the priority be. And if we have the guts to make that priority, I'm all with you. We have everything that is needed to fulfill that priority. The problem is, we can't get our mind to make a priority. Let me give you two examples, real-life examples, where the good is the enemy of the perfect. We created a global open innovation institution called Green Touch, to make all the internet networks in the world 1,000 times more energy efficient than the existing network. And that's absolutely necessary, because all of you are going to do the same what you're doing here, and you use your smartphone. And since everybody's doing that and everything will be in video, the energy consumption will go through the roof. It is unsustainable. It will happen. So we asked and we said, as Bell Lab researchers, can we do it 1,000 times cheaper? Yes, we can. We can. 1,000 times. That would be a revolution. But we can't do it as a company. We need our competitors. We need our customers. We need the research facilities. We need the institutions. And we need the universities. So we went out. I went out 3 years ago against the best advice of everybody. Don't do it because you get heavily criticized. Please don't do it because institutions don't want to work with you. Guess what? We have 52 now. Competitors working with us, all pre-competitive. The exception is Europe. Because the universities are not allowed to work together in an open framework, because how do you deal with IPR? The answer is, we'll see it later. Unacceptable, because the bureaucracy here is more important than what comes out of the tunnel. It's not a criticism to an individual institution, it's a criticism to our lack of choosing. Now, in view of time, let me stick by 2 other points that I want to make. So the first one is choose. And in my view, we have to choose for jobs, because we cannot afford to have great companies in Europe, but a society that is left behind. We run the risk that we have fantastically creative, wonderful companies, but that we have societies in which they have to operate that are left behind. Would not be my model. Number 2, the question was, what do we do with 80 billion? My answer to you guys here, you already have done that, because I guess the majority of you is in one way or the other an advisor or a consultant. That's where the money is. And it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, but that's where the money is. And my third point, maybe more focused to the optimistic side. What if we would really celebrate talent? Celebrate it. We talk about being risk averse. Forget about risk averse. That is so 1900. Let's celebrate success. Let's celebrate talent. What you did here on stage, I thought was the most important thing that you did the whole day here. It's not listening to speeches or a panel, but to celebrate success. Because then you set example by real people who made a real difference in real difficult circumstances. That is what we should do.
Thank you so much. I cannot possibly hope to summarize the discussion so rich, but I want to thank all of you who have been active here in the room and on Twitter, submitting questions, comments, and of course particularly to our panel. Let's give them a round of applause. Very well done. Now, two brief announcements. There is now a coffee reception followed by 2 breakout sessions and a fringe session. And I have to ask you all to be back in the room here in the Gold Hall no later than 6 o'clock, please, because then we will have the great pleasure of welcoming Eric Schmidt, the Executive Chairman of Google. And Eric is on a very, very tight schedule, so we cannot start the session late. Please be back at 6 o'clock and enjoy your coffee break. Thank you.